Yes. Okay. That's loud.
Ed couldn't get that.
I will stand here so you can hear me. Okay, but I'm gonna go over the changes that we've made to Elliott in version 8.6 for the Avalara sales tax interface. It's a long project. Just to reiterate what Edward was talking about this morning, that for the national sales tax issue, I mean, I remember when they made the ruling about the physical presence. I mean, it was a big discussion where I worked at the time, trying to decide if having a consultant in a state qualified you for having a nexus in that state. So I remember when all of that went down. And then lo and behold, Amazon comes in and breaks the rule. Like Edward's example was that they had a distribution center that was in Las Vegas, but then they were shipping in, products into California. And because they were out of state, they did not have to charge sales tax. So the states are saying that's not fair. We need a change. No change happened. But then finally, the South Dakota versus Wayfair happened, where the Supreme Court said that doesn't matter. Nexus doesn't matter any longer. So when you're talking about the sales tax issue, when you're dealing with all these states, all the jurisdictions and municipalities, you're not just talking about trying to figure out what the sales tax percentages are for all of those areas. Then some of those areas charge a different percent if it's a use tax, which is a sale that came from somebody that is out of state. So if you're in state, you may pay 5%, but if it's coming from out of state, they may give you a reduction. It may be only 2%. Avalara will track all of that. And then the other issue we have is, what do you do if I only sell to resellers? So my customers I sell to are non-taxable because they redistribute my product to their customers. But then you also have the issue, which we ran into in implementation, where, well, what if that customer walks into your place, picks up the merchandise, but he's not reselling it to somebody else. He's keeping it for himself. Is that taxable? Is that not taxable? How do you handle situations like that? And then how do you prove that that person is a reseller? You have to keep all the information on file. You're responsible for keeping all of the exemption certificates on why somebody is non-taxable, and Avalara will handle all of that. So in 8.5, Elliott supported Vertex for the sales tax integration. In 8.6, we're favoring Avalara over Vertex. So anybody who is on Vertex before should plan to migrate to 8.6 to integrate with Avalara. The Avalara solution is cloud-based. So when we came up with the solution, we had to have that what if scenario. Well, what if the internet's down today? How do we handle calculating sales tax if we can't talk to them to get the information? But the good thing about Avalara is that they support more than 13,000 US tax jurisdictions. Anything from your local city, county, district taxes, state taxes. They even cover, like in August and September, some states have a tax-free day on certain items where you don't pay tax when you're buying supplies for your kids or clothes when they go back to school. And they support all of that as well. To support this for Elliott, what we did is we integrated the product taxability. There's codes that are associated at the item level, at the product category level, at the user-defined code level. So you can group these items together and say, these items all belong in a group, they get this certain tax category. And then we also allow you to set up tax exemption reasons for for groups of people at the customer type level, but you can also override that at the customer and at the ship to level. So as far as the system requirements for running the Avalara integration, you have to use relational database supports. The code that actually interprets the information from Elliott and sends it to them to calculate the taxes uses the relational database. You have to have report desk enabled, and you also have to have power search enabled. Some of the data that we store, that we get from Avalara, for assigning codes and things like that, we are using a file field structures that aren't supported in regular COBOL, like long var charts, like Edward mentioned before. So to search that data, we have to use Power Search, because Power Search is written to handle relational databases, and it can handle fields like that. You have to have an online account from Avalara. You also need to have an Avalara sales tax interface license from NetSlint, and you have to be running version 8.6. Now that throws a little, wrench in the works when you're trying to run 8.5 and 8.6 simultaneously. So what happens is if you are running 8.5 and 8.6 at the same time, and you have an 8.5 user that accesses one of these applications that's going to talk in one way or the other to Avalara, then they'll see this kind of a message saying you have to run this application in 8.6. And the same thing will happen on any of the reports. So a report will just, it won't even try to process anything. The report will just stop until you have to run this report in version 8.6. To run the Avalara interface, you have to do, if you haven't already, obviously if we're requiring 8.6 in a relational database, you have to do the database conversion to use alpha document numbers. You can still use numeric values, but you have to have your data converted to support that. Also, just the setup of Elliott to use Avalara requires multiple utility programs that will do database conversions. When I say database conversions, I don't mean changing sizes or anything like that, but we're physically going to go in and override your tax codes that are in there to what we need so that we can pass the information to Avalara. Then we'll apply that same information to your customers, your ship tos, all the orders. So it's a one-way conversion. You can't go back. And because it's that way, we recommend that you convert your live company at the end of a month or the end of a quarter so that it's a clean cutover as far as reporting is concerned with Avalara. And you also need to post all of your existing invoices to accounts receivable before you start. That's so that whatever Elliott's calculated for taxes is what gets posted. From then on, posting invoices and printing invoices and doing all that processing will actually communicate with Avalara to calculate taxes. We also recommend that you set up a sandbox environment. A sandbox environment is a test environment. So they have production environments and sandbox environments. So you would set up like a test company in Elliott, copy your data over, set up the sandbox environment, and then start going through that procedure and testing what's going to happen when you do this conversion and what it looks like. There's a lot of setup work that's involved in the process. It just takes a lot of time and training before you start using it. And then we also recommend that when you set up the sandbox, make sure that the features that you turn on in that sandbox match whatever's in your production environment. So where do you start? If you want to investigate this and see what's involved, we have a knowledge-based article called the Avalara Documentation Roadmap. And there's probably 50 knowledge base articles that are in here that explain the whole process on the conversion utility and setup and everything that you need to do. I'm gonna go through some of the basics on what you're gonna see once you do that conversion and what happens within Elliott and how it changes the user interface. So for our design principles, these are rules that we put in place when we started. So we wanted to be able to take that extra data that we were going to get back from Avalara. We like to store it. And it's just like the SPS interface where we're using attributes, we're using the same thing with Avalara. So we have these new types of attributes that we created. And I'll show these and I'll give you some examples of what they look like. So here's a snapshot of the data, and a snapshot's attached to the order as soon as, let's say that you went into order. Well, there's two things that could cause the snapshot. If you went into order entry and you actually enter in an order and you calculated taxes, okay, for some reason you got to the billing screen, they credit card, you want to do a pre-authorization on that. Obviously, we need to at least try to calculate taxes before the pre-auth goes through. So we will make a call to Avalara and we will calculate taxes. So at that time, we actually store that information here. We store what address was used when we did the tax calculation. We have the order amount, we have miscellaneous charges, we have freight, and all these things are stored here so that we know that, let's say down the road, when you go back later, let's say you make a change to the order. Making a change to order is going to change the order amount and it's going to force taxes to be recalculated. So if you went in and did something else with that order, let's say you went to print it, you went to print the picking ticket after that happened. We need to recalculate taxes to estimate what those taxes are. And we know that we need to do that based upon the data that's in here. If any of these things have changed since the original calculation was done, then we will recalculate it. Now, when you calculate taxes with Avalara, there's the first attempt that you do, you have only, when you're in doing order entry in Elliott, you only have the order number. That's not the actual document number that your final tax calculation is attached to. That's attached to your invoice number. So calculating taxes with Avalara actually is a two-step process. So we call them first to calculate it with the order information. And then when you print invoices, we'll do another calculation where we should have final freight amounts, we'll have miscellaneous charges, any changes that you made to the order. So, and that transaction is based on an invoice, but at that time, and to us, it's uncommitted. And with Avalara, you have two states that a tax calculation can be in. It can be uncommitted and it can be committed. Uncommitted means that it's not the final for that document. You could void it. You could get rid of it. I mean, you can manually go into their portal and get rid of it. But once the tax calculation is committed, it's committed into their database, and then it can be reported to the taxing authorities. So the data that we're storing in this snapshot is based upon the order. But when invoices are printed, then we capture that information again, and we capture what the final amount was when taxes were calculated. With Avalara, we try to make the user design simple so that all the work is in, a lot of the work is in the setup work, and it's not when the users are running Elliott. So we have the ability to go in and you can set up those use and tax codes. They're all stored in the attribute so that the user doesn't see that in the user interface. And use codes, like I said before, are used to indicate why a customer is exempt from taxes, and a tax code is used to indicate what type of an item it is. And all of these, like I said before, can be set up on a hierarchical level so that you don't have to like for especially the items, you don't have to assign them to every single item. But if you had a group of items that are in the same product category and they're all the same, then you could assign that one just to the product category, and Elliott will pass that information along without having to set it at each individual item. So here's an example of a use code. So the use codes are provided to us by Avalara. So you would run a utility program on a monthly basis to download these in case they have added additional criteria for why someone could be exempt. When you're in attribute file maintenance, we have a new feature for this, for Avalara specifically at this point, where you can actually do a search. You can search for the reasons why somebody could be exempt from taxes. So you're searching all of the use code data that was downloaded from Avalara. And then this is the goods and services attribute. This stores why, you know, what type of an item it is. So I just went in and I picked an item, or actually I picked this product category, this fruit product category. So then I went in and then I said, oh, I'm going to try to find an item, you know, a taxable tax code type that's for fruit. So when I did the search, you can see here, just typing in fruit brings up, you know, 49 possible things that I could choose from for what type of a fruit this thing is. So this is why, one of the other reasons why we're using Power Search, just to give you the ability to use this wildcard search to try and find and pick out what kind of an item this is. We have the tax breakdown attributes. When we receive the tax calculation back from Avalara, they actually break it down into up to 5 different taxing levels. 1 through 4 are your standard, like 1 is state, then you have, you know, 2, 3, and 4 is your county, your city, and your district taxes. But then they also have a tax code type 5, which is that special stuff that was implemented last year for the state of Colorado that they add a little charge on if you're selling from out of state. So here's some of the data that we get back from Avalara. I mean, this is directly from them. We didn't do anything else with it. It's just, we take it and save it. So it's here on a order header basis, and it's also on a line item by line item basis. So then you could go back and look at this data and query it and see how the taxes were for each jurisdiction if you wanted to see the data yourself. It's also up in their portal, but at least we have it in Elliott as well. And the last one is the Calc Avalara attribute that is used when we do address validation. Now within Elliott, we have, you can turn on address validation. So when you enter, you know, you set up customers, ship tos, orders, or whatever, we can send the address over to Avalara and have them validate to say whether or not it's a valid address. Or if you choose not to do that, then we do get some of this information back from Avalara whenever they attempt to calculate taxes. So then we save that as well. But you see on the screen, so we have this Elliott zip code checked. That means at least we know that the zip code you gave us matched the Elliott database. And then this the Avalara address check means that Avalara actually successfully checked the address and they said it was good. And because Avalara requires us to pass through the line item data, we cannot, we don't allow you to enter the sales and credit memo processing will not allow the entry of tax amounts in tax 1, 2, and 3. That's because Avalara wouldn't calculate it because we don't have enough data to process through them. So you need to process that information through customer order processing instead. And this is an example of the message that you'll see on the screen where we block out those 3 tax code fields. Okay, so in case of an emergency, let's see, when the internet is out, you have the ability to download tax rates from Avalara themselves. They update these on a periodic basis. And then these are the rates that we would use when we would calculate taxes. And you notice here on the screen, you can see that we have a sales tax rate, but then we also have a use tax rate. So within Elliott, based upon how you have things set up on your Avalara portal, you can say whether or not you want to, the state does sales tax or the state does use tax. So then Elliott will try to figure that out if we are not able to communicate with them. So we try to charge the taxes at the proper rate, or at least an estimate, a good estimate of what the tax amount may be. And because we don't want to take invoice posting down by communicating with Avalara, what we do instead, like I said before, when invoices are printed, they're uncommitted. We don't commit the transaction during an invoice posting. We write them to a queue instead. And you can see this, the one that I have highlighted on the screen. You see where it says that it's estimated. Well, at the time that that calculation was done, that means that we were not able to communicate with Avalara. So it just estimated taxes in Elliott. And the rest of these that are on there that say to commit, that means that they were successful and we're just ready to mark them as committed in Avalara. So what happens with that estimated one, or what would happen? So let's say that the amount was different than what, let's say our estimated amount is different than Avalara's amount. Then we have reconciliation accounts, and we would calculate differences, point to the, post GL distributions to those accounts to try and offset the difference between how they calculated it and how we calculated it. So you'd be able to track that. Plus, we also noted on the report, sometimes we may just not calculate taxes for like tax code 3 at the lowest level. But then later on, when you post it, you may see, oh, it was the same amount, but they just split it between 2 and 3. I mean, that happens a lot of the time. So their estimated rates are pretty good. When you're in order entry or sales desk, you're going to see where this is an example of what you would see for when Elliott is just using those estimated tax rates. So you'll actually see where it says that they are estimated. If it doesn't say estimated, then that is actually what we got back from Avalara. Okay, address validation. I mean, for Avalara to work properly, it's important that your ship-to addresses are correct. I mean, they do rooftop determination for how to calculate taxes. So we have the ability within Elliott for us to call them to pass the address through, for them to validate the address and come back and tell us whether it was a good one, a bad one, or give us some suggested changes to the address. If you don't turn that on, then you have to take the chance that when we call them for the first time to calculate taxes, that it's going to go through. Otherwise, they'll come back and say you had a bad address and we'll put the order on hold. But here's an example of what the screen looks like when we go through an address validation routine. So the your address section is what we pass through to Avalara. And then the suggested address is what they pass back. So you can accept this or you can reject it. If you accept it, like for example, I did this in customer file maintenance. If you accept it, then you can see that it updates the customer file on the back end. So when you look at it again, you'll actually see that we've updated the data with what they've sent back to us. And also, here's an example of of what we do with the tax code conversion. You can see tax codes 1, 2, and 3. They have the state for that customer and then a 1, 2, and 3. So the 1 is means that it's a state code. A 2 is accounting a district tax, and a 3 means it's city tax. So here's an example. So if we had California 1 is California. Now, California's state tax is actually California state tax. So that's, if you took a look at the tax code file, we actually have the tax code in there. But if you looked at tax code CA2 and CA3, it's just a marker. It doesn't hold any tax percentages. It doesn't do anything. So if we didn't use their estimated tax rates, we would only calculate taxes based upon California. But because we looked them up in that table that I showed you, we're able to at least get an idea of what it would be for that zip code for CA2 and CA3 if they provide it to us. Like I said, they're just placeholders. They're not for any specific jurisdiction whatsoever. Like right now, if you would design your tax codes, you would have to say, I'm doing this for, the city of Los Angeles or LA County, or you would have to have all these tax codes to find this. We just use markers. And this is what I was talking about before with the use tax versus sales tax. So you can see on this field 7, we have a tax type and whether or not it's taxed locally. This information, the defaults for these are updated every time you download data from Avalara for those estimated rates. And it's based upon what you have entered in the portal. So if you said that for the state of California, I do sales tax, this would be sales. If you say, so we read the data that you set up on the portal and we update it here. As far as when taxes are calculated, they're calculated, like I mentioned before, on the billing screen if you're entering a payment amount. So we have a good amount before we do a credit card transaction. Otherwise, the first calculation happens when picking tickets are printed. And that is when we try to catch. So if you didn't validate addresses, we would catch a bad address when the picking ticket's printed. Then if you go into credit hold and release application, we have a new category for taxes. So you could just bring those up and go through and fix the ones that were tax issues. You could go fix the addresses on those orders and remove the hold flag. So typically, additional costs like freight and miscellaneous charges may not be accurate or may not even be added until you go through the shipping process, which could be after picking tickets are printed. So again, taxes are calculated another time when invoices are printed and when we have the final invoice amount. Like I said, so if there's any issue at all encountered when taxes are calculated, we will put it on hold. And there we have tons of log files and we create notes and we give you reasons why we give you the reason that came back from Avalara to say why they rejected it for tax calculations. Okay. Yes.
Several. The first one, we're a unique organization, but it's not a lot. We sell firearms. So on this side, we sell firearms to, like I was looking to Jeremy from his address. Who's going to ship Devin's address? The kitchen available. How does Avalara handle that situation? Because Jeremy should put that his address, but the actual ship address is hers.
They tax on the ship too. They look at the warehouse location it shipped from. Okay, so in Elliott, when you have your warehouse location, they do it based upon the ship to where it's going, destination addresses.
Next question is, where do we get the money to stay? Because Avalara, we
Yeah.
pay them and then they distribute it.
Yeah, well, I don't know how that works exactly, and I don't know. They have them do it.
In all these cities and all these states, right? So. We sell to like all, you know.
All of the
We
United
sell to
States.
individual customers, they're not resellers, everybody's taxed,
Yeah.
but like, that would be a nightmare to set up an account. For every one of them, so I don't know about offers that where they'll distribute. the tax
Yes,
on the same
yes,
fees for tax.
yes.
They'll have to get it signed up.
You have to sign up for it. Yes. SST. Yes.
After that. Everyone's registered.
I don't know. If you can say that Avalara, no registration. It is.
This is good to
Affordable.
It's the one time.
Somebody else has been in a situation, how about Northern Ireland and make it here?
I'm gonna do, we're going to mark that, and that's what I'm picking up the question.
Yeah, I'm celebrating this integration. I've been asking Edward.
Yeah.
Please.
for a long time.
No.
Each day. Each day.
But you only, like, we it's triggers at different times of the year, like, just before I left, we can contact register in Mississippi. So, but two of those states are member states, that's a season on it. And, yeah, or file your term.
Well, what I'm saying is not.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
24 are members. Yeah, so it's half.
Yeah.
One question is.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So we have a lot of resellers and people that would be exempt from the sales tax. Do you have to send all of them through? Avalara, or
We
can you
just,
say if I?
we just changed that, remember?
That's the big question. Okay, remember in the very beginning, okay, she mentioned that's a big question. Okay. The big question is for your reseller, okay, will other state come back and then pick on you and say, did you collect his sales tax certificate? How do you know he's a reseller instead of an end user? Those kind of different things.
Okay.
And so it's a no, okay. And if Avalara has something called the certificate, the services, meaning that the reseller has to upload the license to Avalara. And then from there, then Avalara say, okay, you are exempt. And then if they don't do that, then no, you're not exempt. So then they manage the sales tax certificate issue. So then you don't carry that burden. That's a possibility. It's that I think that's the best I can answer that.
They're making, it's manufactured.
Right, they're
all
exempt. Mhm.
Everything is all level.
Right. So the question is, how do you prove that they're exempt, right? Do you collect their digital certification, something like that?
Yeah.
And then, yeah,
We have
Right,
tax
right,
forms.
exactly.
okay.
Exactly.
Was,
And
there are charges based on how many you're sending to them.
they do.
Right, they do.
That I don't want to send them all. when I
Right,
know
right,
exactly
right.
that they're not.
So, but you do have some taxable, right? Do
No,
they?
not
Do you?
really.
Not really,
Not really.
not really, okay, yeah. Okay,
Yeah, but if we sold online,
Then
then that would
yes.
be,
that would be taxable.
Yeah.
We actually, just Brian, just so you know, okay, we recently made a change that for those that's not taxable, we don't have to send the data to Avalara. There's a flag to that I believe may potentially cut down a lot of transaction fee for you. But I don't know whether you want to do that or not. That's the question.
I don't know from their state what they require, they still want to see that data.
Mhm. Right.
And now I do because they make some triggers like that. Otherwise, it may
So like Mary, do you sell to people that's not taxable?
Yeah.
You do, right? What is the ratio?
I thought we sold to more retailers, but now that I've been into
No, so the question is do you report to those state for those non-taxable transaction?
And that one's-
Non-taxable transaction, do you report it to the state?
Yeah,
You
Yeah.
still report it anyway?
yes, because Avalara tracks it and tells me when I hit the threshold or when I'm coming up on threshold, that I have to start, registering and updating.
Oh,
Oh,
we're not talking about the nexus, right? We're talking
no,
about
no,
reseller.
Uh-huh.
Do you sell to reseller?
Yeah.
You do, but for those reseller, you don't collect sales tax, right?
Correct.
So,
yes,
but do you still send that through the Avalara?
Okay, so it,
And non-tax.
Right.
yes.
Correct. Right.
Every state's different.
Right.
Assuming that.
Right.
Right.
You're basically a citizen.
So that's a, so remember we said the big question, right? If you are mostly deal with the non-taxable retailer. Now, do you suddenly need to report those non-taxable transactions to all 50 states? That would be a lot of burden, okay? That's a big question, I don't know. Okay.
All four sales are not all sales.
Right, right, so you don't have to report that.
This is a new ground, okay, meaning that where the house state will enforce it. And then do they only care about those taxable transactions, or do they say, oh, even for those non-taxable transactions, we want to know about it, okay? And then they want to make sure you didn't cheat. We don't know how it's gonna play out. This is new.
Are you gonna start,
Huh?
are you gonna start charging sales tax?
No, I'm too small for anybody to audit.
Because in Michigan, we pay use tax and your invoices go on my use tax.
Yeah, I mean, so, Michigan is not gonna audit me for $20,000, something like that, you know what I'm saying? So,
I'm paying it for you, so we're good. We're not paying it anything.
so, okay. So, I know you got all four, okay, but, we have to break for dinner. So,